Time for the 240p Club! I just want to mention that this is the last time we are going to be using that music. These musics that we had the past few podcasts are stopgaps. We commissioned a theme song, and it's almost come to completion. Actually, it's in the editing stages right now. So by next podcast, we will have some authentic music and not that whatever I remixed from a keyboard. All right, it is autumn here on the East Coast United States, and we're getting some cooler temperatures. And of course, I'm sitting by an open window, and I'm getting some wood burning. Someone's got a fireplace going, or like a fire pit going on their patio. It smells amazing. It smells like fall. It feels like fall. It's fall. I love this time of year. This is my favorite time of year. I just light up. It brings back a lot of memories because, like, especially around like school time, like we used to play a lot of video games. You know, like you do your thing in school. You know, you head home, you have homework. A lot of our parents were cool with us taking at least an hour or two to unwind. So we got to experience some video games, some cartoons, some snacks. And then we dove right into the homework. And then if we didn't have a lot of homework, you know, towards the end of the night, if I wasn't tired, I got to boot up my Nintendo or Sega Genesis and just sit there. Because that was hooked up to the TV. That was right near where I did my homework. Because I had a little area there, like, you know, in my basement, that was just dedicated to me. So I could just sit there. I could do my homework there. I could actually have the TV on, the music on if I wanted to. But that was kind of discouraged. But fall just brings back all those memories, and especially, you know, the gaming. Like, the gaming that's what made fall for me. But anyway, we're the 240p Club here. It is fall, and we are happy to discuss a couple fall birthdays. First off, before we get to that, I do want to introduce who we have in the studio today. First and foremost, sitting right next to me.
Why do I get to go first?
Because the microphone is right here.
Oh, I thought it was because I was really cool.
No, don't kid yourself.
Yeah, I know. What's up, everyone? I'm Nikki.
Okay, also to my left, yeah, we were waiting for him to do that.
That's right. How you doing, man? It's Phil rocking the mic, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, Phil is Nikki's twin brother. He's been on a few of our podcasts here, so we're happy to have him again. And, of course, the OG of the 240p Club.
You missed me last time, didn't you? I'm back.
Yep, Ray is here. Ray's going to be with us for podcast number 40. It's not really that much of a milestone. 40 is just 40. Once we get to podcast 50, maybe we'll have a little celebration. I don't know.
Save it for when we get to podcast 240.
I definitely see what you did there. So anyway, we have some September birthdays. It's September. The weather's nice. People are having some birthdays in September. Who's having a birthday in September?
I had one at the beginning of September.
Yeah, me and Nikki on the 25th.
And, well, I'm in June, so I don't count in this little September birthday gathering. But also celebrating a birthday in September. And the topic of our podcast tonight, the Sega Genesis turns 30 in North America. Say woohoo!
Yay!
Sega!
Sega!
Not to be outdone, Nintendo released a system in 1989 as well. You know it as the Game Boy. It's 30.
Blue! That's the sound when you turn on the Game Boy.
Yeah, the
Damn, you old fart.
yeah. Everyone remembers that. If the Nintendo logo was screwed up, that means your game had to be blown in, and
Oh, boy.
No.
they were. It was a little easier than the Nintendo cartridges, but
You blow it.
yeah, you couldn't really jam a Q-tip in there, so you know.
Yeah.
You were just hoping just blowing the dust out works.
Blow it out.
So, are you just going to repeat everything I say this podcast? Oh, man.
You know, I would kick him out, but he's my ride home.
All right, so we're going to be celebrating all of these birthdays. Actually, we got some of these systems on our birthdays. Who here in this room got a Genesis for their birthday?
Not me.
No one? No one?
No, unfortunately, I was a Super Nintendo kid.
But we've talked about this on the podcast many times. You all used to go to friends' houses and play Genesis a lot.
We did, yeah, and then I remember a couple babysitting opportunities, like when we were being babysat. We, well, I guess, because you still call it babysat when you're, like, in 3rd grade or so, but...
It still counts.
Okay, anyway. One of the houses that we were staying at, like family friends, they had a Sega Genesis, and I remember playing Echo the Dolphin for the first time, and I was like, this game's actually kind of cool. So this is what the Sega, I said to myself, this is what the Sega Genesis is like. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, Sega was. I told the story on a few podcasts as well, but since we're talking Sega, we might as well bring it up. I got my Sega Genesis in 1992 for my birthday. The reason being, every one of my friends had a Genesis. It was awesome, and the small mom and pop video game rental place. Well, it's a movie rental place, but it had a video game section. Only had NES games, which was like a small little wall. And then once the Genesis came out, it expanded to a bunch of Genesis games. So that was our, they had the wall. You went there, you rented games. It was awesome. But that's why we got a Genesis. They didn't have Super Nintendo title. Ray, when did you get your Sega Genesis?
I believe I got it right after 3rd grade, like after I got my last report card. Came up like all A's and B's.
Oh, so that's cool. But since we're talking birthdays real quick, what did you get for your birthday? Like, what video game do you remember clearly?
I think I actually got the Game Boy for my 7th birthday.
Oh, that's cool.
It was cool. I got Tetris, Super Mario Land at least, and then later that Christmas I got like Boomer's Adventure and Asmic World and a couple other games.
Oh, that's an obscure one, man. I'm glad you mentioned that title. That's an obscure one. But, yeah, I got a Game Boy for Christmas one year with Super Mario Lands. We'll talk about that a little more later. The only video game system I got for my birthday was the Sega Genesis. But I do remember the very first video game I ever received for my birthday was Super Mario Brothers 2. I remember it was from my sister. My sister was working a nice little job at the time, so she was able to save up some money. And she wanted to get her baby brother the best gift. So she went to that store and got me Super Mario Brothers 2. And honestly, that game is one of those games I haven't put down since. Like, I'll bust that out once a year, maybe. It was so much fun. I know it was so much different. It was like the black sheep of the Mario family, but it was so much fun.
That game is fun. I mean, I'll throw it in my system every once in a while, and usually I played with Princess Peach because there wasn't any game where you could play as Peach then, and she had like the best jumping ability.
Yeah, she had that mid-air float.
Yeah, basically, that's how her character design was, a big floofy skirt, and she would just kind of fly and float.
Now, I gotta ask, Phil and Nikki, you both share a birthday. I know that.
Yeah, man.
We do, yes.
I imagine that you both got video games for birthdays, and you wound up sharing them. I don't think you all just got an individual copy of each game.
No.
Oh, no, that would have been way too much money.
Too much money and weird.
Yeah, it would be kind of weird.
So what was the best birthday gift you got as far as video gaming goes?
For Christmas, not exactly our birthdays, but like in particular, I do remember that Phil and I received the Game Boy Color for our birthday. His was blue and mine was like a reddish pink. So we'll talk more about the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, but that was just
where you
basically
can kind of get away with having the two different copies.
Two
of
different
the same
copies,
game.
yeah.
But like, I mean, can you imagine like, for instance, we got Street Fighter one year. I mean, can you imagine like getting 2 Street Fighters? Like, that's just weird.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can link them together, but
we're talking about Street Fighter Super Nintendo now. We ain't saying like Game Boy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotcha. Because I was about to say they did release it for Game Boy eventually, but it was optimized for the Super Game Boy. So instead of getting 2 copies and linking your Game Boys together, which you could do, You could have just got a Super Game Boy, put the cartridge in and played it with 2 controllers.
Yeah, a friend of ours had that one time, and I was playing Aladdin on the Game Boy one time, and then and it was a very difficult game, but I liked it.
So a lot of memories here in fall. But, all right, we're going to get into some news items before we get into our podcast proper here. There was a surprise announcement from Nintendo. I know we mentioned the Game Boy. We did not mention the Super Nintendo because the Super Nintendo came out in 1991. We'll be talking about that in 2 years, like hardcore, because this is going to be the Super Nintendo's 30th birthday. But as for the... I'd say the 28th year of Super Nintendo being around, Nintendo released the, if you have a Nintendo Switch online subscription, it has like various games you can play, 2-player, multiplayer. I've heard certain things about lag, but I didn't really get a chance to test it out, so there's no review here, but it's really cool to have that Nintendo Switch and to be able to play some of the most classic Super Nintendo titles on the go. Launch titles include a lot of heavy hitters too. It was the only RPG was Breath of Fire, the first Breath of Fire, but it featured Link to the Past, Super Metroid, Super Mario World, Super Mario World 2, Kirby's Dream Land 3, Kirby's Course, I forget the name of the title. There's a few other games, including the Japanese release of Super Puyo Puyo, which was ported over to the Genesis as Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, albeit with a few changes. But it's cool we get a chance to play that game. Also, Sega Genesis Mini is actually, by the time you're listening to this, it should have dropped already. It looks like a Mini Genesis. It comes with 2 3-button control pads. Classic Genesis controllers, I believe, are the same size as the original Genesis controllers. Hopefully the same weight. Hopefully they put something in there to make them the same weight.
No 6-button ones? I'm not buying it.
No, I think you have to separately buy the 6-button one. But then again, the system didn't really come with the 6-button controller until, 1995?
Mortal Kombat supported it, and pretty sure Street Fighter Championship Edition did too.
Oh, so. It absolutely supported it. Actually, the 6-button controller was made for Street Fighter 2.
Yeah, at least.
All right, the launch titles, though, for the Genesis Mini: Echo the Dolphin, Castlevania Bloodlines, Space Harrier 2, Shining Force, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, Toe Jam and Earl, Comic Zone, Sonic the Hedgehog, Altered Beast, Gunstar Heroes, Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse.
Wait, hang on. Comic Zone's a game that requires a 6-button controller, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't require it. It just makes it easier. Yeah, Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse, World of Illusion, Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, Thunder Force 3, Fantasy Zone, Super Fantasy Zone, I should say, Shinobi 3, Streets of Rage 2, Earthworm Jim, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Contra Hard Corps, Landstalker, Beyond Oasis, Ghouls and Ghosts, Alice Kid in the Enchanted Castle, Golden Axe, Phantasy Star 4, Street Fighter 2 Super Championship Edition, Mega Man The Wily Wars. For the first time, non-Sega channel, you get to play Mega Man The Wily Wars. Sonic Spinball, Vector Man, Wonder Boy Monster World, Virtual Fighter 2, Elijah Dragoon, Columns, Dynamite Heady, Strider, Kid Chameleon, Light Crusader, Monster World 4, Eternal Champions, Road Rash 2, and 2 bonus titles never released here, Tetris and Darius. Darius was a port from Taito, or Taito, however you say that. That was never released here. And neither of those 2 games were released. The Tetris for Genesis was Japanese only, thanks to Nintendo's licenses. And the same with Darius. Darius, I don't know why that was never reported here, but it's a good shooter. Another Darius game, actually 2 Darius games wound up on the Super Nintendo. They were all good shooters as well. But that's the initial lineup. September 19th, 2019 is the drop date for the Sega Genesis Mini. And by the time you listen to this podcast, it should already be out. So go to your store, go get one. Unfortunately, it doesn't play your old Genesis cartridges like some of the other consoles they've released do. But
That's not going to stop people from hacking it like they did with the SNES Classic.
I'm sure of it. And also the PlayStation Classic, which apparently was the easiest one out of all of them to hack. But the PS Classic didn't do so well, so we'll forget that exists for now. Of course, this time we are also celebrating 1989. 1989 was a good year. The Simpsons came out, and a little black box you hooked up to your television came out in 1989. Of course, I'm talking about the Sega Genesis.
Sega.
Also known as the Mega Drive if you're in Europe.
Sega.
Sega Genesis, the Sega Mega Drive, it was known by a few things. Super Aladdin Boy in Korea for some reason. I don't know why.
Did it come with Aladdin?
No, I don't think it did. I don't know where they got that from, but it's probably a mistranslation somewhere. I don't know. Korea's interesting with their consoles. But anyway, the Sega Genesis is 30 years old. It was released in August 1989 here in North America. Sega celebrated the anniversary this year by releasing a collection for all the modern systems. It featured a whole bunch of games. It looked really cool, too. You're playing them through what looked like a television. You could have scan lines in it. By picking the game, you picked it off a shelf in some like 90s-looking bedroom. It was awesome. And then they just released a Sega Genesis Mini, which came with 2 controllers and 40 games built in. Fortunately, it didn't have cartridge support, but you can't have everything. But it's awesome to be hooking this up to a modern TV and playing all these games in high def.
I'm sure they're going to find some way to hack it like they did with the SNES Classic.
Oh, of course. The SNES Classic, the NES Classic, the PlayStation Classic, which we'll get into next year when the PlayStation turns 25. But all of these systems, they don't count right now. The Sega Genesis counts. The Sega Genesis was awesome. Sega Genesis was if you don't count the Game Boy, Sega Genesis was the second console I ever got. I got it for my birthday in 1992 because the video store nearby, the mom and pop video store that I could walk to, had Sega Genesis titles, and a lot of my friends around the neighborhood, they all bought a Sega Genesis. I didn't know too many people with a Super Nintendo at the time. So Sega Genesis was king. Sonic sold a whole lot of systems. So let me ask, what are your memories of this system?
I would have to say Sonic 2. I think that was one of the packing games when I got the system in like 93 after like a decent report card. Every time my friends came over that year, they would want to play like the 2-player mode, the racing. We did the same thing in Sonic 3 too when I got that the next year.
Yeah, the racing was fun. I always used to play that when I had relatives come over. A few friends traded some titles, but the Sega Genesis for me was gaming for me. That was where I have the most gaming memories. Like the Nintendo is a classic. I had so many memories with Nintendo. Sega was more the system that brought my family together. I do remember coming home from a wrestling event. This is back in '92, and I had the Genesis hooked up in my basement, and all my cousins were over. They're staying the night. My brother-in-law's over. We're all over. We're all having mind you, I'm like 9, 10 years old. We're having like a guys' night. This is amazing. So we all like hang out in the basement. We're all playing Streets of Rage, passing the controller on, and this is like the memories that like I think of with gaming. Something like that. Something even though like I come home from school, I would go down to my little basement. The basement was like my little corner there. I had a small TV. I had a cable box down there. I used to come home from school. I used to watch cartoons. I had my Genesis hooked up. After cartoons, I would start playing the Sega Genesis. I would have a soda. We had a little like freezer down there, so I'd throw a soda in the freezer, let it sit for 10 minutes until it was nice and cool, and then drink that. I would go to the corner store, stock up on like candy and goofy sugary snacks and stuff like that. And this was the system for me. This is my memory of the Sega Genesis. I'd be in my basement. I'd be playing the hell out of it, playing the hell out of Sonic. Toe Jam and Earl was one of the other games that was addicting. Kid Chameleon, that was one of my favorite games ever released for the system. I remember playing that for hours and then getting a complete game over, no more continues, having to start from the beginning. You turn the system off, you take 10 minutes, turn the system right back on, you start up again because you're determined to beat this.
Let's not forget the legendary classic Michael Jackson's Moonwalker.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my memories of the Sega Genesis are just a little more. I grew up with the Super Nintendo, so any experience that I had with the Sega, I was over at a friend's house or anything like that. And I know I have mentioned this before in a previous podcast. The cool thing about Streets of Rage was the soundtrack. So one of the more memorable things about Sega Genesis was pressing the pause button or going through the options menu and just having like a dance party while Streets of Rage soundtrack was going on instead of actually playing the game. But the game itself was really cool. So that was my very first, I would say, memory of the Sega Genesis.
Yeah, those dance parties were fun, man. It was so funny. And you're pressing, and the music just went on and on and on, but it was so cool.
Of course, I was like 8 years old, and I'm doing like the chicken dance or something. Because I'm like, I'm a stupid bad dancer. Even now, I'm a bad dancer. You don't want to see me in the club.
I'm terrible.
Yeah, but that Sega's so cool, man. I mean, how great it is, and it became a very, very, very long-lasting system.
Yeah, it lasted. Let's see, it came out in '89, and I'd say around '97, '98 was when all the final games are being released there. I think the last few were like some sports titles, and I think Madden '98 might have been one of the last titles. I'm not sure the very last title, because I know people have been making games for this. Actually, in 2019, someone released a working game for the Sega Genesis, which is really cool. But, this is hardware like this is easier now. Like, it's easier to design games that'll work on some of these old systems. So it's kind of hard to count that. But as far as official releases go, give it 97, 98 just about. So it lasted 9 years. It was 9 glorious years of a great system. And even though towards the end, like, the hardware started to look like it was getting obsolete, Sega just kept reinventing itself and releasing all these games with this limited hardware at the time.
And on the 32X as well, but nobody owned that, so...
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the Sega Genesis itself was probably a timeless classic and actually kicked off the 16-bit wars, because Sega was the first one to market with their 16-bit system. The TurboGrafx 16 doesn't count because that was 2 8-bit processors, so it just ran 8-bit games in a clearer picture. But otherwise, this was the first true 16-bit system, and it had a 2-year head start on the Super Nintendo. And aside from a couple arcade ports, Sega finally figured out the secret to making successful games. And some of those titles that came out in 1990, 1991 were probably among some of the best ever to release for the system.
The whole motto was whatever Sega does, what Nintendo don't.
Yeah, I love the ads. That was one of the things that drew me in. Actually, I was in a Toys R Us before Sonic even came out. The thing that was selling this system was this Attitude. So I seen a flyer for it turned out to be a fold-out poster. They were giving them out for free. It was a good promotional tool. So I had to get one, and all these games looked awesome on there. Phantasy Star 2, and I was looking at the Dick Tracy game for that. It was like, yeah, Nintendo, the Dick Tracy doesn't look like this. Turns out it was more, traditional platformer. Ghostbusters, was on there. What else? There's a whole bunch. Altered Beast, obviously.
And, of course, the legendary Michael Jackson's Moonwalker.
Keep mentioning Moonwalker. Moonwalker was, that was an interesting license. I don't know, well, he had an arcade game, too.
That was a great game.
Yeah. Michael Jackson was probably around, I'd say 1990, one of the most popular entertainers of all time. Like, Thriller obviously was 83. That was probably, at the time, that was the best-selling album of all time. I think it edged out Dark Side of the Moon from Pink Floyd. And then he released Bad later on in the 80s. That was the late 80s. And then I remember, actually, he had a world premiere on Fox. Like, Fox never did this for any other artist. Fox did this for Michael Jackson. Right after The Simpsons, Thursday nights, they had a nice little premiere, like a nice little film shot with all the Fox stars that led up to Michael Jackson premiering Black or White, the music video. And, yeah, that's how big he was. Like, he could commandeer Fox primetime programming, which was #1 rated back then. That was one of the best primetime slots, because you had The Simpsons, you had a bunch of other shows, and he commandeered it, and yeah, so it was natural he was going to get a video game.
And then there's the well-known fact that he was originally commissioned to do the soundtrack for Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which he backed out on because he didn't like the hardware or something.
Well, we discussed that during our 16-bit sounds. I do believe they have proof that a lot of this came out, as evidenced by the fact that you won't see Sonic 3 on any of these collections, which is odd, don't you think? Because that's one of their best games of all time.
It's also kind of complicated because they had to split it into two games. Sonic 3 came first. Then you had Sonic and Knuckles, which could connect to it, and you would get what was intended to be Sonic 3 in its entirety.
Yeah, which actually you could emulate pretty easily on some of this hardware, but I think it has to do more with the licensing. That's why we're not seeing any of this. But, Sega won't come out and acknowledge it, but anyway, we're talking the Sega Genesis. One of the other things Sega... And this is where the Sega Genesis, I think, started to shoot itself in the foot. Sega Genesis is an awesome system. You had Super Nintendo out. In order to one-up Super Nintendo, Genesis put out a CD peripheral. That was the big media in computers at the time. CD-ROM started getting really big. You could put full motion video on, granted in a very small window.
And that's just what everyone did instead of using it to its full potential.
Yeah, you put it into a small window, but unfortunately this also meant load times started creeping into some of these video games, but they released the Sega CD in order to, again, one-up Nintendo. It's like, but you don't have a CD peripheral for your system. We do, and look what our CD peripheral can do. The only thing they didn't tell you is that CD peripheral also came with its own AC adapter, and unless you have like a power strip or you have a couple different power outlets nearby, this became pretty difficult to plug in along with your TV and then, let's just say, your cable box, because cable boxes had its own separate plug-in at the time, too.
Kudos for Sega even attempting that. I'll give them all the credit in the world for attempting that, because that is 100% the way the world was going to end up going, and as you see today, that's where it is.
To be fair,
yeah.
I do believe this is more a market at the in Japan it was the PC Engine, because the PC Engine I think came out with a CD system first. I believe that beat out Sega CD. So that peripheral came out in Japan in order to compete with the much more successful PC Engine. It's known as the TurboGrafx 16 here. It didn't really take a foothold here in North America, but I think it edged out Sega in Japan. So that was to compete with them mainly. And because they had the system in Japan, why not release it in the United States to help them win their war with Nintendo?
Oh, yeah.
Nintendo didn't have this. And, of course, this led to a huge controversy because now that you have full motion video in these, you could start making some games that, well, in 1993 were considered adult-oriented. Nowadays, this looks rather tame, but I'm, of course, talking about Night Trap. Night Trap, actually, funny story about Night Trap, came out in 1986. It was designed in 86 by I forget the company, but it was for a system that was codenamed the Nemo. Nemo stood for Never Ever Mention Outside, which is, funny industry talk. But, it was basically, it turned into a vaporware system. The company making it ran out of money. They had this and Sewer Shark. Sewer Shark was the other one. So they had these licenses. They had these games. They were already pretty much done, but they had no system to release them on. In comes the Sega CD. You have two games readily available for launch without much development. You just have to convert the code over. Bam, you have Night Trap. Bam, you have Sewer Shark. Night Trap caused such controversy because basically it's like you're interacting in a pretty tame slasher flick, but it's still a slasher flick. You see people dying. It's not what Nintendo was putting out at the time, and a bunch of people in Congress that were up for re-election decided, hey, we're going to do something to protect the children, because that was the big thing in the 90s. You got to protect the children. So, protect the children, they went after Night Trap. And, of course, Mortal Kombat, but we'll get into that in just a moment. Night Trap was one of the early targets of Congress's vertical about video games. Now, Nintendo being... I love Nintendo. The Super Nintendo, again, I'm not going to talk shit on because it's one of my favorite systems ever. But, the Nintendo decided to play Congress to say, yeah, look at what Sega's doing. They're putting out all these adult games. We're the family-oriented company. That's, basically that was the 16-bit war in a nutshell. We're a family-oriented company. Sega's like, fuck you. We're putting this out. We're more adult-oriented, and this is what's happening. However, Congress took notes. Night Trap was targeted. Sega eventually did edit it down just a bit, take out some more of the gory parts. So, Night Trap was an early victim of congressional censorship. And then, of course, Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, Mortal Kombat was one of the greatest games of all time. And
yeah, Mortal Kombat basically, I'd say, invented the fighter genre. Because you had Street Fighter 2, and then any game that was considered like Street Fighter 2 was considered a Street Fighter 2 clone. Mortal Kombat came out, it differentiated itself so much that it wasn't a Street Fighter clone, it was a fighting game. So hence, the term really started to come of use, and it really kicked off basically what I consider the golden age of 2D fighters.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, definitely Mortal Kombat was in a league of its own. Like, I would say the closest thing that came to rivaling Mortal Kombat, and I'm saying this with quotations, was Killer Instinct, which came out later on in the SNES.
Well, here's the thing with Killer Instinct. Killer Instinct was a product after the congressional hearings, because Mortal Kombat took its beatings from Congress as well. And it was argued so much that eventually Sega decided, you know what, just like music in the 80s with the PMRC, we're going to just put a voluntary label on here and say, hey, this is not for children. That eventually became the rating system, and Sega took it a step further a year later, and, to agree with all these other companies, formed a independent council, which, if you buy a game today, you will still see that rating on that box that they came up with in early 1994 as a result of these congressional hearings.
I'd say, going back to what was really unique about Mortal Kombat was that you were actually playing with people, with mocap, with motion people in the game, whereas with Street Fighter you had 2D designs. You had the Street Fighters, you had the Karnov's Revenge, you had the King of Fighters, Art of Fighting, SNK, whatever they were doing, with their own little anime character designs. Then you had Mortal Kombat, where it was real people. You were taking real people's heads off and ripping their spines and everything.
And here's the nice part about the Sega Genesis hardware. Granted, you could render this a lot better. It's an arcade. It's motion actors. They have people playing these characters. It's great. But in consoles, technology isn't really that advanced where they can do that. However, they still manage to make it look presentable to the point where they didn't look cartoony or it was converted. 16-bit looked pretty close to the arcade. Granted, the Super Nintendo had a better port, but the Genesis sold like hotcakes because it had the blood code.
Bloody!
And that was Sega's answer to those congressional hearings when this game came out for home consoles. They were like, well, we didn't put blood in there unless you entered a secret code. Now, the secret code was probably the second most famous code of all time. Yep. It's ABACABB. Everyone knows it now. Aside from the Konami code, this is the second most famous code of all time. They put it out in every magazine before the game was even released. Any magazine you picked up in the shops, any Game Pro, you picked up Video Games Computer Entertainment, you picked up EGM, you picked up any of these games, any of these magazines, had the blood code printed. Clear as day.
The fatality changed too once you put in the blood code.
Oh yeah, if you never put in the blood code, Mortal Kombat for Genesis was even tamer than the Super Nintendo.
Yeah. Yep.
But what did this do? This established the Genesis as a console for teenagers and adults because it had a few cutesy games, but at the end of the day, a lot of the kids that owned the Sega Genesis had this, the NES growing up. They were kids. They were enjoying the kids' games. Now these guys, they're teenagers, just starting to come of age. Also, the teenagers that were hooked on the NES when it came out. They're in their 20s now. The Sega Genesis is out. It's perfect for them. So that kudos to Sega. And according to the documentary we reviewed, Inside the Console Wars, a few podcasts ago, Sega was a really chill place to work, apparently. Sega of America brought back that old Atari vibe where, people showed up dressed however they wanted, just as long as they got their work done, and it was a more relaxed atmosphere than suit and tie Nintendo. Sega was the system with attitude. Sega had quote-unquote blast processing, which isn't a real thing, but, they marketed it as a real thing. And also, they had, for the Sega CD, they hired a real street rapper from Brooklyn to, MC the commercials. It had attitude. Like, games had attitude. It released, especially the Sega CD, even though Sega CD, there's not too many memorable games these days. There's a few, titles that, still held up. But, you had the Sega CD, you were the coolest kid on the block. You had these titles, they sucked. Sewer Shark sucked. But you know what? You were the coolest kid on the block because you had it.
If you play Aladdin on the Sega has a sword. Aladdin on the Super Nintendo does not.
We also mentioned this at the Sound Podcast, Beavis and Butthead. 2 different games released for Genesis and for Sega. Personally, as much as the Angry Video Game Nerd trashed the game, I like the Sega version better.
Me too.
You know what? I felt that was a very unpopular opinion, trashing that game. Granted, it had a few design flaws where if you didn't do things in a certain order, you can get stuck in the game and have to basically start from the beginning. And it also had one impossibly hard part, like this one sewer thing, and then you had to get something, and then you had to go back through the sewer. It took me months to beat that.
Earthworm Jim and Lost Vikings, in my opinion, are better on Genesis than on Super Nintendo. They have better music and more stages, actually. I think Earthworm Jim had that, one stage with a Doc Duodenum in the Genesis version. It wasn't in the Super NES version.
I must also say that we did this way, way, way back then, but we compared Final Fight to Streets of Rage. Granted, Streets of Rage came out a little later and was more like a Final Fight clone, but you know what? The home console Streets of Rage entire series beat out Final Fight in our opinion. So you have that as well.
Yeah, that guy at the rollerblades.
Yeah, the entire series, Streets of Rage beat out Final Fight in a back alley brawl. This is many podcasts ago. I don't even remember. Sometime in 2016 we discussed this. But we're going to go to later on in the Sega Genesis lifespan. By about 1994, I'd say that's the video game rating system was out by then. So Super Nintendo, Nintendo decided to ditch that censorship policy. Mortal Kombat 2 came out with full blood on Super Nintendo and was a vastly superior port than the Sega Genesis version. So, and then, Nintendo also came out with Super Metroid that year, and it came out with Donkey Kong Country. Final Fantasy III came out, which was probably, at the time, was the best RPG ever created. All these games, Super Metroid I mentioned, Super Mario World 2 came out, I believe, the following year. But 94, 95 was when Nintendo started reasserting its dominance in the video game market and really took control of the 16-bit wars. However, the Sega fired back with, they had Comic Zone, they had, as Phil mentioned numerous times, Vector Man and Booger Man.
Yeah, those, and the commercials for those games, in fact, all 3 of those games, you said, took you into the game. I mean, those commercials made you want to buy it, The Comic Zone, the guy sitting there in the comic, and it's like, I think the kid gets sucked in, if I remember on the commercial. It's like a kid gets sucked into a comic, and then you're like, wow.
Yeah, it was a cool commercial. It was a cool game. It was really hard, for beat 'em up. I never got that far in that game.
That game is extremely difficult. In fact, I remember Nikki was showing me some, exactly what to do, how to get there with it. How to get between the levels and all that.
Here's something else. We didn't discuss this. Super Nintendo was actually, I'd say, a superior system as far as platforms go, because Super Mario World was one of the most legendary games ever released. You also had Pilot Wings. You had, which that wasn't a platformer. That was a flight sim. It was a great flight sim. Castlevania 4 came out. Turtles in Time, which looked almost as good as the arcade game. You had all these games come out for the Super Nintendo, showed off the graphics of the Super Nintendo. It had a vastly superior sound chip, even though I feel the Genesis designers made more with their sound chip. But one of the things Nintendo failed miserably at was sports titles. For most of its life, sports titles on Super Nintendo just weren't happening. Electronic Arts, however, found it very easy to design some sports titles for the Sega Genesis. The first John Madden Football came out for Genesis. It was fantastic. It was one of the best football games released at the time. And then 92 just completely redefined it. So, EA Sports, NHL Hockey 92, 93. These games were amazing. EA never really did a basketball game justice, but they also released eventually FIFA. For the World Cup in the United States, they figured big marketing for soccer, because soccer games were never marketed here. You had Goal, which for the NES, and you had a few other titles, but let's be realistic. Soccer was not on the minds of most Americans in 1991. 1994, however, with the World Cup coming here, soccer was at the forefront, and of course FIFA came out, and that was one of the quintessential soccer titles.
Yeah,
America
was getting good at
soccer.
Too.
But again, only on the Genesis. On the Super Nintendo, they did port some of these games. John Madden Football did come out for the Super NES. It was jerky, the animation sucked, and the sound was less desired. Which is funny, because you have this game, it's great for the Genesis. You have a superior sound chip, supposedly, and they just floundered it. 93 as well, John Madden 93 sucked. NHL Hockey 93 sucked for Super Nintendo. They still didn't do a basketball game right until, I believe, 96. And baseball, forget it. They didn't do baseball right until the next generation system, so we'll leave them at that.
Not to mention, Super Nintendo didn't have Mutant League.
No, Mutant League Football and Mutant League Hockey were some of the more entertaining games. As long as you suspended belief that it was going to be like a actual, like the actual sports they represent. Nintendo would eventually get certain games right as far as sports titles go. I mean, they had Ken Griffey Jr. Baseball, which is pretty good. It was a good sports title. But for all the sports titles that Electronic Arts wasn't getting right, Sega decided to get right. You had World Series Baseball, which came out in 94. It features the 93 rosters. And it was unique because the pitching was done at the you were looking at a big batter's box. It was more realistic. You picked the pitch, you picked the speed and the direction where you wanted to put the pitch. It was more realistic. It was actually the first realistic attempt at a baseball game. It was greatly done. So Sega had that going for it. Sega did Sega Sports, which came out with a few good titles. The World Series Baseball is probably the best. They did racing better. Super Monaco GP was one of the better racing titles that ever come out, even though it was hard as hell. And let's not forget Road Rash, which wasn't actually a sports title officially. It wasn't ever released by EA Sports because it was an illegal motorcycle race. You know what, though? It was extremely fun, and it was everything Super Hang-On wasn't. Super Hang-On was the motorcycle title. I wasn't a big fan. You played Road Rash, fuck Super Hang-On. You could punch your opponents in Road Rash and carry weapons around. It was way better.
Don't talk to me about Road Rash. I was playing that game yesterday, and it was a while since I played it. And I said, okay, well, let me just go weaving in and out of traffic and everything. Let me just go running down the course. Knock a couple people over. Sven was one of the guys I knocked over like 4 times in a row because he just kept getting back up. And then he pulled a wrench out and tried to hit me, so I kind of dodged it and just kind of like bumped him off the road. And I'm thinking, okay, great. I'm in 3rd place. This is cool. I see the 2 people in front of me. That's fine. I see a car going the opposite direction, swerves out of line and hits me right off my motorcycle. I screamed so loud. This is Barbie supermodel car rage. Like, why?
many games of Road Rash were lost to that car that just decided to come out of nowhere and smash your bike.
Like, why are you here? Get out of my road, you little shit. Go to LA. Go do your stupid freeway. Get the hell off my road.
The sports titles were one of the things that made the Sega Genesis. It was fantastic to boot up even some of the older sports titles. We didn't care. We played them. They were great. They were, Streets of Rage, playing Streets of Rage with a buddy or a family member, or, your cousins were over. You're playing, two-player mode simultaneous. It was great. All these titles were amazing. The Sonic 2 race, the Sonic 3 race. They were awesome. But like all good things, the Sega Genesis did have to come to an end. I believe it was hastened by the fact that Nintendo, in response to the Sega CD, decided to, we've talked about this on numerous podcasts, decided to partner with Sony, turn their back on Sony, blah, 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 blah. Sony got pissed off. Sony made it its own system. PlayStation came out. Now, Nintendo was still a year away from ever making the, which was known as the Ultra 64 back then. So they were latecomers to this. So PlayStation was just going to go unannounced, unchallenged. So you had the Sega Saturn, in development for a while. So Sega ramped up the development of the Saturn, finally released it in 1995, and that, again, since when a new system comes out, that drastically reduces the amount of titles that obviously coming out for the old system. Sega sees this and releases a bit of hardware called the 32X, which was next to impossible to get into your system, number one. Number two, you had to put yet another AC adapter, in some plug somewhere near your video game setup. And finally, aside from a fairly decent port of Doom, this system was useless. And eventually, they incorporated something that you had to have the Sega CD as well. Sega redesigned its console a few times, including one which made it look portable, which, you could unhook it. It played like a Discman, but it ate up batteries like it, was nobody's business. So it was pretty useless as a Discman. You could just bring it, And then eventually, towards the very end of the Genesis's life, they came out with the Sega Nomad, which was a portable Genesis. You could plug a cartridge in, and you can play Genesis on the go. However, just like the Game Gear, the battery life was shit. This is why I don't count the Game Gear as a true portable system, because if you're in a long car ride, you're playing your Game Gear for about an hour before it craps out. If you're sitting by an AC adapter, that's a different story, but in your car, you don't have the thing hooked up to the car battery, your thing's crapping out. So
it was basically a portable Master System.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes.
Yeah, and it was terrible in battery life. It was a good system. It was just really, really bad.
Yeah, the 32X had a good port of WrestleMania, the arcade game.
Yeah, that was one of the selling points of the 32X. Is like, hey, look what we can do. And then everyone forgot about it the following year because Sony PlayStation came out and they had the ultimate version of Mortal Kombat 3. Not Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate, but the Mortal Kombat 3 version that looked, sounded, and played exactly like the arcade. You were looking at the animation like, oh, it's the arcade! And that sold a whole lot of systems. Among a lot of their other pack-in titles, of course, that was what killed the Saturn, really. The launch of the Saturn was more expensive than the PlayStation. PlayStation really reduced their costs, and their launch titles were a lot cooler than, Virtual Fighter and all the crap that came out for the Sega Saturn. Although the Saturn was a good system, it had a cult following, it had a life of its own. With that coming out, of course, the 32X was useless. It lasted like less than a year. Everyone, realized this was just a cash grab from Sega to try to, steal some more market for the Genesis. But eventually, it led to the Genesis not being developed for anymore. In 1998, I figure, last few sports titles were converted over, and then that was pretty much the end of the Sega Genesis. It was the end of an era, but it was an era that lived on because as far as this household is concerned, my Sega Genesis was hooked up. Like, throughout moving, throughout living at home, it was always hooked up to one of my TVs. The system never left my TV. Actually, I could go into my bedroom. I have an old CRT TV. I have my Genesis hooked up to it. I could still go right now if I wanted to and play some of these Genesis titles. That's how much of an impact this had on me. And also, Electronic Arts released some of its best titles of all time for the Sega Genesis. There's a reason why EA is the behemoth it is. It's all thanks to the Genesis. And also, let's not forget the awesome, awesome commercials that Sega gave us. The Sega and the Sonic commercials, the Sega does what Nintendo don't. All the memorable ads and all of the memorable everything about this little black box hooked up to the TV.
Boogerman commercial. He's sitting there eating.
You're hung up on Boogerman,
yeah, but it's
dude.
so cool, that commercial. I mean, he's eating and eating and eating plates upon plates upon plates of chicken. I mean, it was in that diner. It's so cool, that commercial. I mean, it really makes you feel the game. That's the idea with those commercials. Like, you look at it, you're like, wow, this is like a whole, like a world.
I also like a lot of those 90s commercials. The 90s were an interesting time for commercials. Like, if your commercial didn't really have attitude, then you weren't really selling that product. That's one of the, that's one of the beauties of the 16-bit wars, and that's how a lot of these games got noticed. That's why you're still playing Boogerman in 2019.
Yep. That's 100% truth.
Ray, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Have you ever taken a really long car ride as a kid?
Yeah, I took a few. We used to go camping in Lancaster, which was about an hour and a half away from where we lived.
Yeah, I did the same thing. We used to go to the shore, which is about a 2-hour drive, give or take, depending on traffic. What did you used to do in the car on the way there?
Until I turned 7, I don't really remember, but after that, I always had my Game Boy with me.
Me too, man. Me too. Game Boy, of course, turns 30 this year. It was released in 1989. It was actually the second handheld console. The Atari Lynx beat it to the market. However, the Atari Lynx, aside from a cult following, didn't really have the software support that the Nintendo Game Boy had. And plus, Nintendo had such a share of the market at the time, it was basically printing money with whatever it put out.
And it had decent battery life, unlike some consoles.
Yes. I got my Game Boy in 1989. I believe... No, I'm sorry. I'm lying. I got it in 1990 for Christmas. It was Christmas 1990. My parents wouldn't get me one at first. They got me one of those Tiger electronic craps. Like, I got the bowling game. It was terrible. I couldn't figure out how to make the ball actually hit the pins. And prior to the Game Boy being released, that was the only thing keeping you occupied in that back seats. Granted, like, I had something like a bingo thing where basically you pull this out. This is interesting. I found this at like a department store. This is entertaining for a 7-year-old. You're sitting in the back seat. You pull this out. It has all the road signs like that you can think of. Whenever you see a road sign, you close the window, and then bam! Once you have 5 in a row, obviously you have bingo. It was stupid, but for a 7-year-old, this is how you occupy yourself instead of staring at tree after tree after tree going by. Or not even if you're caught in traffic, which happened a lot heading to the shore. So I got my Game Boy. I begged my parents. My parents finally relented. For Christmas, I got a Game Boy and Super Mario Land.
I didn't get Super Mario Land at first. I got Tetris and Bubble Bobble with mine.
Ooh. Bubble Bobble was a good one.
Arguably easier than the NES version, but I don't really remember that well.
Here's another story about the Game Boy. We weren't allowed to bring them in school, obviously, but my school in 3rd grade, 4th grade, etc., they had final exams. Towards middle of June, like before school lets out, you go have your exams. You go in, basically you take 1 or 2 a day. Like this whole week's dedicated to exams. You take your exam. The exam's long because it's basically everything covered throughout the entire year. And after you do your exam, you turn it in. You have free time. Like they told you it's perfectly acceptable, because it's June at this point and school's almost out. It's perfectly acceptable to bring in your Game Boy. I have a Game Boy again. I had the Tiger Electronics. So it was torture playing that thing, looking around, seeing all these people pull out their Game Boys. Again, my parents finally got me one, and in exams the following year I was able to pull out my Game Boy and play some Tetris.
Whenever I was with my friends, it was like at my place or something, or their place, and we'd be on the NES instead. It was kind of cumbersome because you had to have like a Game Link cable and carry it around everywhere if you wanted to play two-player games with Game Boy.
But it was fun. I mean, this is the first time you can do this, like, let's just say in a car. Like, you know, nowadays kids have phones, kids have all this technology. Back in, like, the early 90s, like 1990, you didn't really have all this. I knew maybe one person at school that owned, a cell phone, like his parents owned a cell phone. That's it. Like, no one owned any of this technology. So this was a breakthrough because, you know, you're sitting there in the back of a car. You don't have control of the radio. Your parents have control of the radio. You don't have control of anything. You're just sitting in the back seat of this car, bored out of your mind. Now, especially if there's light outs, you have a Game Boy. You have video games. It's like you're not in front of your Nintendo. These games weren't as powerful as their Nintendo counterparts, but they were good. And you know, playing through Super Mario Land, it didn't matter if you were home. You had the Super Mario Brothers hooked up, you know, the console hooked up to your TV. You could play Super Mario 3 right then and there. Nope, I'm just going to sit on my couch. I'm going to play Super Mario Land. You know why? Because I'm addicted to this game. It's great.
And some of their best games were actually on the Game Boy as well. Like Kirby actually made his debut on the Game Boy in Kirby's Dream Land.
Kirby's Dream Land is one of my favorite Game Boy titles ever.
And, of course, there was Link's Awakening.
This one. Yeah, Nintendo also. It wasn't just this system. I don't think would have done as well if every game put out there was just like a NES port, you know, ported to the Game Boy. Because like they did that for a lot of games. Blades of Steel, you know, you had Contra. Contra had its own Contra game for Game Boy, and honestly, it was different enough. It followed Super C, but Operation C was a fun game, and it was unique. It actually, that's what a lot of these game designers were doing. Instead of just grabbing a game and porting it over, like, you know, they did it to a few games. But
you had Alleyway, which was basically Arkanoid, and how the fuck does that even work without a paddle controller?
Yeah, you had ports that were terrible, but, you know, that's for every system. But you also had all of these original games based on licenses for Nintendo, for, like, you know, some of the Nintendo games, and they put out, you know, these unique games for Game Boy. It's like you weren't playing just a scrolled down version of Mega Man. You were playing a new Mega Man game with some old bosses, but these levels were just brand new.
And of course, later in its lifespan, there was Pokemon, which became its own huge legendary franchise.
Yes, exactly. Pokemon was basically around the time Pokemon came out, the Link cable was all but forgotten, really. No one really used it. All of a sudden, now that you can trade Pokemon, that Link cable made a huge comeback.
It's, between my friends and I, it was the most I ever used it in my life, the Link cable.
I've only used it a few times. I had a friend that had a Game Boy. We used to play Tetris, and I believe there was a 2-player mode of Super Mario Land, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think so. No. Super Mario Land, I'm not sure if it had 2-player.
I don't remember it having 2-player.
No, I know Tetris did. Oh, I definitely know Tetris did. And we used to play a lot of that competitively.
Link jump for the first time on Link's Awakening. You can actually make him jump. That was, think about, really something. 'Cause you couldn't do that in the other games.
Yeah, Link's Awakening was, again, Nintendo saw the good sense. Instead of making ports of a lot of games, and a lot of these other companies, they take the license and make unique games for their systems. Nintendo did that. Super Mario Land was unique. Super Mario Land 2 is one of my favorite games released for the, you know. And, of course, that was the very first appearance of Wario. And then, of course, you had, you know, Super Mario Land 3, which Wario got his own game. That was probably my favorite Game Boy game of all time. Yeah, just like you mentioned, Link's Awakening.
Yeah, Link's Awakening is like a whole new game. I mean, add to the story and everything.
And not to mention unique games. Metroid got a sequel on the Game Boy exclusively.
Yep.
Metroid 2 is a fun game. It actually just got remade like not too long ago for the 3DS, which was a response to some unscrupulous game designers making their own fan-made Metroid game.
Mm-hmm. It also had a sequel to Kid Icarus, which was only released in North America and Europe. It didn't see the light of day in Japan, unfortunately.
Also, the very first Mana title in the Secret of Mana series was released as Final Fantasy Adventure for the Game Boy.
Yeah, interesting bit of trivia there, since Secret of Mana, or Seiken Densetsu as it was called, actually sort of predated Final Fantasy, because they were planning to release it for the disc system in Japan, but they kind of ran out of money, and Final Fantasy ended up being what they thought was going to be their last game. But yeah, then Seiken Densetsu ended up coming out as Final Fantasy Adventure, so it's kind of weird loophole they have there.
Yeah, and that was the thing. In North America, they knew that name would sell, so that's why this was Final Fantasy Adventure. And then you also had Final Fantasy Legends 1, 2, and 3, which were unique RPGs as well. I believe in, what was that series?
Saga.
Yeah, the Saga series. But yeah, Game Boy had all these unique games. Metroid sequel, it had Kirby's Dream Land and Kirby's Dream Land 2. That was unique for the system. It was never ported over. These were unique. Mega Man's 1 through 5, Mega Man 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 all came out for the Game Boy. And they were unique. They had featured unique levels, familiar bosses, but very unique levels, and some of the music's actually converted over pretty well. I mean, especially Mega Man 3 and Mega Man 4 for Game Boy. They did perfect recreations of 3, 4, and 5.
We don't talk about Mega Man 2 for Game Boy in here.
Why not? Well, it was, to be honest, that was the black sheep of that series, because that was done by a different designer who wasn't really that familiar with the Mega Man series, but aside from being ridiculously easy, I've actually beaten that on my first sitting. It was unique. It was still a unique game.
And it had terrible music.
Yeah, it did have terrible music. But again, it was a unique game. And then you had, Mega Man 3 just made everything better for the Game Boy. And it was hard. I still haven't beaten it to this day. And so it's one of those few Mega Man titles I've never beaten. So I got to sit down someday, maybe on Twitch, and just play it until I beat it. But, this was probably one of the best systems to ever be put out, because Nintendo decided everything that made the Nintendo Entertainment System successful, they were going to put out as a portable system. And you know why this outlasted the Atari Lynx, the Turbo Express, and the Sega Game Gear? Even though these had color and vastly superior technology, the battery life lasted forever. And the batteries came with 4 AA batteries. They were rechargeable. They weren't the best batteries, honestly. They didn't last too long. I had to go eventually buy batteries, but 4 AA batteries fresh from the pack will last you for hours. It didn't matter. These games were in black and white. The games were so much fun. It didn't really matter at all. And finally, it was essentially, after a while, vital for all road trips. If you were sitting in the back seat with nothing to do, that Game Boy was a lifesaver.
Yeah, I mean, even when you're doing school trips,
That's
right on the school bus, man. That game, the Game Boy, you played it, and when somebody did, they were like, people were in awe. Oh my God, can I play? Can I play? Can I play?
Eventually, everyone got one, and then everyone had the link cable, so you could play certain games.
Yeah.
And then, you guys were telling me before we started about Pokemon. You both had Pokemon.
Yeah.
We did, but this is more leaning towards the Game Boy Color. If we can transition to that at another time.
Well, we could count that, actually, because that really extended the life of the Game Boy. It was backwards compatible, so all the Game Boy titles still worked on the Game Boy Color.
Yep.
And it did breathe new life into a console that was nearing the end of its technological run.
So yeah, definitely, because like I have mentioned many times, Phil and I are twins. So on our birthday, we received 2 Game Boy Colors and Pokemon Red and Blue. So I got Red and he got Blue, and we were able to use the link cable so that we could battle. And you know how competitive 7, 8-year-old twins are. So I worked and I grinded and I worked my ass off to beat him in this game.
That made you get the link cable. That game, I mean, it you couldn't beat it without it, because certain Pokemon you had to trade in order for them to evolve, and then certain Pokemon were on one game and certain Pokemon were on the other.
Well, that's how you sell games.
Yeah, you're right about
It
that.
sold games. It sold, it kept the game going too, because once you traded Pokemon, once you started realizing how much Pokemon you can trade, again, the slogan was "Gotta catch them all."
Yeah.
You basically played this game until your batteries died, and then you got new batteries and you played it again.
Yeah.
Because you this is an excuse to bring your Game Boy to school. Your friend that has Pokemon caught this Pokemon, wants to trade with you. This is great stuff.
This was wherever it was. I mean, I'm talking about, I remember when I used to play baseball when I was younger, it was two opponent teams, and, they knew each other, from the neighborhood, and one guy on the opposite team came to the other team's dugout because they were both trading the Pokemon, like during the game, for God's sakes. They're playing in like the championship game where the coach is going nuts in the plays and all this and that. You got some guy goes from the opposite team until he's ready, his turn to bat, pulls out the Pokemon and says, "Okay, I don't have this guy and you have that guy, so ba 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 ba."
We used to do the same thing in advisory in school. We had a period right before first period of school where basically they just took attendance. You had the option to, do your homework, etc. I never played Pokemon, but all the people that did play Pokemon would break out their Game Boys. Mind you, it was a Game Boy Color at the time. They would link up and trade Pokemon. Meanwhile, all these, I would just be either sleeping or there's a few times I got into Magic the Gathering for that. But for the most part, it was basically trade Pokemon or do whatever homework you decided not to do.
You could play that Pokemon on a regular Game Boy as well. Like, the game itself is backwards compatible.
Oh, yeah, I know. Well, it came out for Game Boy first, but then, the cartoon series just blasted the whole thing into the stratosphere.
Okay.
And then, Game Boy, Nintendo decided to market the Game Boy Color around that time, too.
Yeah, the thing is, Pokemon got so big so fast, and then as soon as they put out Red and Blue, we said, okay, well, now we have these Pokemon in color. So now it's okay, well, we're also going to use art / color to actually do some more marketing, too.
One thing I want to bring up before we change topics here. The Super Game Boy, we didn't mention that. The Nintendo felt a lot of these titles, like we all did, they felt a lot of these titles were so successful that they shouldn't just be limited to the handheld system. So Super NES had a peripheral called the Super Game Boy, which had Game Boy hardware in it. It hooked up to the Super Nintendo. Then you hooked up a Game Boy game, and you could play it on your Super Nintendo in color. Granted, it was 4 colors, but it was still color. And the colors use number codes, so you can write down the number code for the same color and then enter it in later. And then game designers also figured out that you could put unique things for each game into your design. So right before the Game Boy Color came out, Kirby's Dream Land 2, Donkey Kong, you plug, the Donkey Kong port for the Game Boy. You plug it into the Super Game Boy. It comes up with its unique background, unique colors. And actually, Kirby's Dream Land 2 had a unique sound effect. If you're playing it, you hear the level music. If you're playing it on Super Game Boy, there's some applause with that level music.
There's also a Game Boy version of Space Invaders, which, if you plugged it into the Super Game Boy, actually had a hidden version of a Super NES version of Space Invaders, like a complete Super NES game hidden in a Game Boy game.
See, that's very cool. It's the code, they managed to compress some of the space in some of these cartridges. So the code, it would read it like a certain way on a regular Game Boy, or to read it completely different on a Super Game Boy. It is a cool little trick to extend the life of the system. Now, we all know what happened to the Game Boy. The Game Boy eventually gave way to the Game Boy Color. Nintendo finally went to more modern technology with the Game Boy Advance, and then went to even more modern technology. It had a backlit Game Boy Advance SP that, instead of using batteries, had a charger, which like most modern electronics do. And then by that point, eventually it turned into the DS, the 3DS, etc., until Nintendo finally this year put the end of their portable consoles, with the end of the 3DS. However, the Switch is a hybrid portable / it hooks up to the TV, so the tradition lives on, and thanks to the Game Boy, the Nintendo Switch right now is probably one of the top-selling. We still call it a toy, I guess, but that's how Nintendo markets it, but it is probably one of the more in-demand systems released in quite some time.
And people said smartphones were going to kill portable gaming.
Yeah, no, I haven't played this game on a smartphone yet that would replace anything my Nintendo Switch could do. One of the fun birthdays we have this month, as far as video game systems goes, was released on 9/9/99. Yes, it's the same date in Europe as it is in America. It was the original nines, all nines. The only time we're going to see that this century. That was the Sega Dreamcast. Sega Dreamcast came out following the Saturn. It was released on September 9th, 1999. Great marketing, by the way, Sega. And wound up in a whole bunch of homes. It performed well, which it was surprising because of its abrupt end, but we'll get to that. Now, who in this room had a Dreamcast?
I got one for Christmas of that year. I'm pretty sure it still works, even though it's a bit noisy.
Yeah, the Sega made some pretty durable hardware there.
Yeah, so there were a bunch of memorable games for that that you can't get anywhere else, I think. A lot of good games have been ported to other systems by this point, but Soul Calibur, House of the Dead 2, and some other games like that, you can only play on the Dreamcast still, I think, unless something has changed.
Well, I thought Soul Calibur you could also play. Oh no, that's Soul Edge.
I think Soul Calibur 1's on Xbox 360, but I don't have an Xbox, so...
Call of Duty, I believe the very, very, very first Call of Duty was on the Dreamcast.
It was on PC as well, I thought.
Speaking of which, the Dreamcast was also the very first video game console to have internet connectivity.
Yeah, you could get it with the PlayStation... Well, no, the PlayStation 2 came about afterwards, so...
A year later.
Yeah.
Didn't even come with the modem. The Dreamcast came with a 56K modem attached with the option to upgrade the broadband, which I don't think ever came out in the U.S., or was just prohibitively expensive either way, but...
Yeah, well, broadband back then was fairly expensive, too. I remember I was doing a lot of online gaming, and I was still using a modem because it's not as widely available as it is today.
Probably the most well-known online games available for the system were Phantasy Star Online, which got a start on the Dreamcast, and Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which Dreamcast was pretty much the standard for online play for that game for many, many years. It only recently died out, I think, actually.
I like Sega's support for a lot of the fighters back in the 90s was unparalleled. I mean, a lot of these games wound up on PlayStation 2, but PlayStation and PlayStation 2. But for the most part, the Sega Saturn, if you get an import disc, and you wound up importing some of these fighters, like X-Men Children of the Atom and the original X-Men versus Street Fighter, they ran so much better on the Saturn, and the graphics were very, very close to arcade. The only difference was the loading times, because you are running these from a CD-ROM.
To get a little off track here, isn't that because the Saturn was originally designed as a 16-bit upgrade and eventually became a 32X?
No, it was supposed to be a standalone system from the beginning. They had a system in the works called the Neptune that was supposed to be like that, but it never saw the light of day anywhere.
I think parts of that made it into the Saturn, and that's why it was so tough to program for and not as successful in America, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it failed because, well, this is Saturn. We'll just talk about the Saturn real quick and go back to Dreamcast. The Saturn really didn't do as well in North America because of the third-party licensing, and also because Sony dropped the price of the PlayStation to basically wipe out all kinds of support for the Saturn. There was a lot of Saturn faithfuls, but once the Saturn was launched, there was no Sonic title for the Saturn. It came with Virtua Fighter, which was it wasn't the best port of a fighting game.
Over in Japan, it had a lot of RPGs, and Sega wasn't confident in their ability to sell RPGs over here, so we only got like Shining Force 3 Part 1, and that was it.
Yeah, it was a 3-part game. We only got Part 1. But that's the Sega Saturn. The Dreamcast was the eventual follow-up to the Saturn, and Dreamcast was, in all aspects, including hardware, a much better system.
I almost forgot to mention this. Their memory cards, I don't think anyone's ever done this since, but their memory cards were like called VMUs, and they were actually like really primitive, like handheld systems. I remember like when I had Sonic Adventure, I would take that friggin' Chow mini game everywhere for like a month or two.
Yeah, it's like little thing. Yeah, that you said about the
They look
memory
like
cards.
Yeah, it looked like little Tamagotchis.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, or like that layer thing that like that virtual Pikachu thing that people had around, or like like Tamagotchi thing almost. I mean,
I did mean like the whole concept of like downloading mini games onto your memory card and playing them on the go. They never did before. I think
PlayStation attempted it and failed.
right.
they had a thing called the Pocket Station, which was only released in Japan. Final Fantasy VIII famously had a support for it with like the Chocobo mini game, but that never came to be here.
The Dreamcast is a hell of a machine. I mean, it was beautiful. There was so many great overlooked games, and in fact, like I said, it was almost like a pioneering thing of what happened. Like later on, all the other systems caught on to it. I mean, I'll talk about Mortal Kombat 4 in a second, because that first Mortal Kombat and then Mortal Kombat Gold, which was also like Mortal Kombat 4, that's maybe remixed or something. The next few Mortal Kombats were just like that, but there were like so many games that Sega Dreamcast made, and then the other systems that came after it, all build upon that.
You want to talk about cool Dreamcast games, and I could talk about this game forever, is Cannon Spike, which was like, it was like a Crash TV kind of game like that, and it was like a Capcom All-Stars. It was like Mega Man, I think it was Buletta from Vampire Savior, but over in America they call her BB Hood. I think Cammy was in it, and I think Charlie Nash was in it, and I want to say there was one more character who I can't remember. But it was really cool. Like, all the characters had skates on, and you could, and you defeat enemies and everything. It even had one of the coolest designs for Vega, which they called him Fallen Balrog, because it was a Japanese game, and, they called him Balrog out in Japan, but it was such a cool game, and I could advocate for that game forever, but Capcom doesn't really seem to care that it ever existed. Although they did give Cammy her Cannon Spike costume for Street Fighter V, so, there's still... But it was just such a cool game, and, like, nobody knew what it was, and whenever I used to talk about it, people were like, what the hell are you talking about?
We played it once in arcade at one point in Atlantic City for like a week, and then next week it was gone. It was replaced by, like, actually a soccer game that's very similar to something that later on became NHL Blitz, or even... NHL Hits, and then NFL Blitz. I mean, it's like kind of a Crash Soccer, even like a Mario Soccer, but it was a real almost like prototype for those kind of games that happened. That was the arcade that they took out in Atlantic City. I don't remember the name of the soccer game, but it was on the Dreamcast. It was like a very special soccer. It was only attempted once, and I think later on it was influenced Mario Soccer on the GameCube. So there was so many, like I say, all these games that came out on the Dreamcast, the things like PlayStation 2 and onward, took it all from there.
Especially, the Golden Age of Fighters, we can call it, where you had games like Project Justice, you had games like Rival Schools, the Marvel Versus series, you had... like
Power Stone.
Power Stone, we'll talk about Power Stone.
Soul Calibur.
You even had, sorry, go on.
Jet Set Radio.
Jet Set Radio. And Crazy Taxi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy Tat was that was the game, man. That was like
That was the only game that everybody knew
Everybody
who the
had
Offspring
it.
was.
everybody had, yeah, everybody had it that had a Dreamcast had that game. I guess it came with it.
I think it was a launch title.
Yeah, launch title. See, we didn't get the Dreamcast until a friend of ours, in fact, a few years ago, gave it to us.
Maybe 3 years ago, we finally got it. We still haven't set it up yet, but
oh yeah,
we have to.
oh, we set it up a few times. We were playing Phantasy Star Online with it. Mm-hmm. Amazing game.
Can you actually go online with that anymore?
Yeah. Well, we had to do like kind of like a research, but
like a pirate server?
well, you have to be online to play it. As crazy as it sounds, it's
And
like
we were able to play it.
yeah, we looked up on a message board, and it's some guy posts this like long code. It's not like a word, like it's a bunch of letters, like FCBXW2
Sounds like these are like modem strings or like a
Yeah.
encrypted server or something.
And I mean,
like
it was it was like a long code. We found some message board. Like, I couldn't start it, and then Nikki looked it up. I said, "Yeah, look up like what to do." She looked it up. Guys connected, and I mean, it's a very difficult game.
And this is actually a good opportunity for our 240p listeners. Guys, girls out there, if you have any Dreamcast experience and you've ever played Phantasy Star Online, tell us how you did it.
Yeah, we'd all love to hear your stories.
You're going to go to our Facebook's the best place to reach us. It's facebook.com/240p Club. And we're also on Twitter at 240p Club. So both of those places are the best places to reach us. We have 240pclub.com. I update it occasionally, but that's where you listen to the podcast. But yeah, go on one of the social media sites we run and let us know, how did you get this game working, if you ever got it working.
Dreamcast had a keyboard too. Did any other video game console ever have a keyboard?
No, that's another one.
Eventually, I had a mini keyboard for the PS3, but I never had one for any other system.
Yeah, there was this game called House of the Dead 2 on Dreamcast. It was probably like one of the best light gun games ever made, and it had legendary voice acting. It's like so bad you just can't help but enjoy it. And then they released an update to it called Typing of the Dead, which you play on your keyboard instead of a light gun, and you have to type random words or sentences in order to defeat the zombies that come up on the screen.
This sounds like an edutainment title.
It's pretty cool.
It's highly regarded as like one of the best and most unique edutainment games.
It sounds like something I would love to play, and that I would get frustrated in the first 5 seconds.
I think that's been ported onto PC.
Wow, that does sound cool.
And I think it's only because my long nails would stop me from typing, and I would make so many typos.
Die Hard Arcade. That's another one on Dreamcast. I beat that with John Falloon. Die Hard Arcade. Great game. You know, Fighting Force ended up on it. I think that was on PS1 at first, but that ended up on a Dreamcast.
Let's since we're talking, let's just change topics just a bit. We were talking about personal memories of the Dreamcast, and then you got one 3 years ago that you haven't hooked up yet, but you've played a few. I have very little experience with the Dreamcast. I got a PS2 like years after it came out. Like, this is right around when the PS3 maybe was, I'd say, a year away from launch. I was way behind on like my video game systems because I never really had the money just to lay down on one of these systems. But, you know, Dreamcast, I didn't have a Saturn. I had a PlayStation 1. That was my intro to we call it the modern era of video gaming, but let's be realistic. That system is 20-something years old now, so it's definitely not the modern era anymore.
The bridge. I mean, the bridge to what later on became the modern era.
Yeah.
You know.
But I basically, I had a Super Nintendo. I had a Genesis. I was late to the party getting a PlayStation. I got one in like 97, right around when Final Fantasy VII was coming out.
That was the time to get it, though.
Yeah. And then after that, I didn't get another system for ages. Actually, I got a Dreamcast thanks to working. I got a couple gift cards for the holidays, and wound up. It was a $50 gift card. Then I wound up getting another $50 gift card the following year because I lost the original one. But then I found it in one of the pockets of my jackets. So I had $100 now, and I just had to take a long trip to this department store because we didn't have one anywhere near me. And it's like, okay, I have $100. What do I spend it on? I know I'm going to get a GameCube, even though I was not really that interested in gaming. It's like, hey, I want to bring myself to the modern era. Then eventually I got a PS2, but Dreamcast, my experience with it, I played it once in a Best Buy display to play Sonic Adventure. I did horribly at it. Didn't last too long.
That was a great game.
And one of my friends...
It hasn't aged well, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have it for PS3, and I got slightly better at it. But yeah, it hasn't aged well.
Yeah, but that whale chasing you on the first level, as you're running across that bridge, you gotta say that looks pretty cool.
It is cool. It is cool looking.
Yeah. Now the best thing, like the Fantasy Star, I'll even compare this. I mean, it might even sound crazy. It's like a futuristic Dark Souls. If you ever played that game,
I don't. A lot of things get compared to Dark Souls these days. Phantasy Star was always futuristic because it was a futuristic.
It is, yeah. Future, yeah.
It is like
Star,
they
you play, you'll see what I mean.
Yeah, they took the medieval.
You're talking about the online game. That was like a massively multiplayer online game. I think it was like their answer to EverQuest because World of Warcraft hadn't come out yet. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know if I say it's anything like Dark Souls.
There's a new rule here for the 240p club. Anybody who mentions or brings up Dark Souls has to do 20 push-ups.
Damn, I'm gonna have to do it right now.
Yeah, Phil,
you might do
20 push-ups.
I might do 40 because the whole thing is I'm gonna mention the gang.
40 push-ups on your knuckles, boy.
The thing, like with Dark Souls,
have
though
you
I like
beaten the first game?
Oh yeah, no, not Fantasy Star. Dark Souls, yes, because it's so difficult. That's what I like about it. I like the fact, and that's what makes Fantasy Star.
You know,
cool.
we had a podcast on Metroidvanias not too long ago. We brought up Hollow Knight, and everyone's comparing that to like a 2D Dark Souls. I'm like, why is everyone comparing everything to Dark Souls? Dark Souls is its own thing. Let's not talk about Dark Souls.
It is. But like I say, even though that game came way before Dark Souls.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with Dark Souls. It came before Dark Souls. It's an MMORPG.
Yeah.
I guess I don't even know. I never played Fantasy Star.
Fantasy Star is.
So why aren't any of you guys
Souls
on the floor doing push-ups? You guys know how many times you said Dark Souls in the past 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's.
That is the game that's like Dark Souls now. Yeah.
I'm done. Okay, no,
we're gonna be hitting the gym later.
Yeah.
Just like the end of Phantasy Star Online, let's going to talk about the end of the Sega Dreamcast. What killed the Sega Dreamcast? Why was this only around for 2 years?
Too expensive was the very first reason, and same thing with the Sega Saturn.
It wasn't the Sega Saturn, yes. The Dreamcast, though, it dropped down in price because PlayStation 2 was already announced and was about to launch.
Right, they didn't want to run into that again.
And it also, it was better hardware and better, the PlayStation 2 ran on DVD-ROMs. Like, you could play your movies in there. Like, if you had a DVD, you didn't need a DVD player anymore.
Right.
I had a DVD player, decided to crap out on me, so I have all of these DVDs now, nothing to do with it. Hey, wait a minute, I'll get a PS2.
Yeah, the DVD player is obsolete.
Well, after a while, you were able to get them at Target and Walmart for like $89.
That's what I mean. They're obsolete now.
Yeah, it took now, but back in 1999 and 2000,
if you had a DVD
that thing
player,
was expensive.
Yeah, and then you're right. If you had that was like a status symbol. That DVD player.
No, really, it wasn't in the early 90s. Yeah, maybe mid 90s, when it started coming out. But
they were like, damn, a DVD player.
I got my DVD player in 2000, 2001, around there, and I thought it was awesome because I was still on VHS.
Yeah.
So that was cool. And then it decided to break on me. So I had all these DVDs now and nothing to play them on. And it's like, okay, I could go buy one of those cheapo DVD players at Target or Walmart or whatever. Or, I could just buy a PlayStation 2 and, that's what I wound up doing late to the game. I wound up getting a PlayStation 2 and it worked fine as a DVD player. And obviously the video gaming system, it was amazing. But this is what killed the Dreamcast. That supports Even though it didn't really have online support, you had to buy a separate modem in order to play online in PS2 games.
Yep.
That's
expensive right there.
Yeah, but
man.
it was the technology, even for single player games. The technology was far superior,
top notch.
And the big thing that killed the Dreamcast, PlayStation had third party licensing.
Yep.
Their third party licensings was off the hook good. Like they had Electronic Arts. They made all their games for PlayStation at the time.
Yep.
And then you had Squaresoft. They made all the Final Fantasy games and everything that came out. They came out for PlayStation, and then Final Fantasy X, and eventually for PlayStation 2, which was like a system seller right there.
Oh yeah.
So all of these games are coming out for PS2. Dreamcast, with its inferior technology, no one wants to port any of these games over. However, it was really the last gasp of a company that gave us the Genesis. It gave us the Game Gear. I don't have too many fond memories of the Saturn or anything else like that, but these are, the Genesis was one of the most legendary systems ever released.
Yeah.
Game Gear was a great system, as long as you realized that it was pretty useless as a portable system.
Oh yeah.
Because of the way it ate batteries, but the Dreamcast was like the last gasp from this company. It was the last thing they put out before.
They went back to making slot machines.
Well,
that's what they do now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big business.
Yeah, you make money.
That one's definitely more Konami.
Yeah, but Sega makes the slot machines too. That's how they started, actually.
Yeah, well, Sega also makes a lot of third-party titles now for all the various systems. They've also, again, the Genesis Mini's coming out, so they're marketing that. They released the Sega Genesis collection on quite a few different systems with different games on each system. It was great to be able to play some of those old games again. And their emulation, honestly, is rather easy. It's easy to emulate the Sega Genesis these days. It runs on inferior hardware. You just need a nice emulator, or like Sega did, they took the emulator themselves and marketed it as the Genesis Mini. It's going to be great. It's going to be amazing to be able to plug this into an HD machine and play it just like you would the original Genesis.
Right.
But this is the last gasp. The Sega Dreamcast was the last gasp of Sega as a console maker, and it's so sad how it fell apart. The final thing we didn't mention, actually, about their demise as a console maker was the fact that CD burners were really big at the time. They were victims of their technology. Around 1999 when they released it, CD burners were out, so you could get one. It was kind of expensive. Honestly, around 2000, even a year later, most PCs started coming with them standard, like a CD burner. Because music, Napster was huge back then. Music piracy was really big. It's still big, but is really big back in 99, 2000. It was starting to go unchecked and just get out of control on the internet.
Yeah.
And with the high-speed internet, people could download an album like nothing. There was a big demand for CD burners.
Yep.
And, you burn a music CD, you have the software to burn a music CD. You could burn something else. You could burn CD-ROMs. PlayStation figured out a way to kind of lock out a lot of these, so some of the later titles you weren't able to burn. Like some of the launch titles I think you can, but some of the later titles you weren't able to pirate unless you had a modded system. The Sega Dreamcast, they didn't really have those copy protections, so my one friend that had it, I remember we left college one day, we just all decided to say, the hell with our last classes, we're just going to go hang out. So we went to his place, and a bunch of us, and he had a Dreamcast, and he did some boot disc, and then another boot disc. Next thing you know, he had the entire Nintendo library on a CD-ROM on his Dreamcast. And I was just sitting there playing the original Metroid because then I turned into show mode because it's like, none of these people have ever beaten this game. Okay, I'm time to put it on a show. I know I wasn't going to do well at Punch-Out with that Dreamcast controller, but Metroid I think I could take care of.
Oh, yeah.
But that was my other memory of the Dreamcast. Piracy is what killed the Dreamcast. It kind of stifled Nintendo as well because Nintendo was so paranoid about piracy.
Yep.
They started releasing these systems the 64 was cartridge-based, which a lot of developers weren't too keen on, so that's why the PlayStation was able
too primitive.
Yeah, that's why the PlayStation was able to gain traction.
Yeah.
And then you had the GameCube. GameCube came with those little CD discs. those things were, like, I guess a little easier to manufacture, but they were specialized.
Well, yeah,
like,
you
it wasn't
pirate
like
them or too difficult.
Yeah, you couldn't pirate them, but at the same time, your GameCube was a gaming system. It wasn't anything else. Like, you could buy, Xbox, you could buy a PlayStation 2. That was a DVD player. That was, you could play music CDs in that if you wanted to. Not the GameCube.
The Xbox, you had to buy that remote. The remote control in order to play DVDs.
The same with the PS2. Like, you didn't have to, but
no, Xbox you had to. Like it was like a port, like a little plug-in thing.
Oh, for the
you had to buy that remote in order for it to use the DVD. It was really weird.
See, I didn't have an Xbox growing up either. I went
that
PlayStation.
was awesome. That's another thing. I love the Xbox, the original.
After doing this for 48 podcasts now, I don't really know what our next topic's going to be.
How about Dark Souls?
Why are we still talking about Dark Souls? Why are you not on the floor doing 20 push-ups? At this point, you're at 120.
That is the game right now, Dark Souls.
We are not mentioning Dark Souls.
That's 140, by the way.
We're not talking that game. I talked enough about that during Hollow Knight. Someone brought that up. It's like, nope. Nope. It's not a 240p error. It's actually a hard game. I appreciate it because it's such a hard game. It's like a throwback to throwing your controller NES difficulty, but let's be realistic. It's not 240p, it's not retro, and I have no fond memories of that game.
This conversation just died.
It is the game that cannot be mentioned, that will not be mentioned, must not be mentioned.
We shall not mention this anymore. This should be like the old ones, like, in Rylay. We will not mention them, the Elder Gods.
What about Demon Souls?
We're not mentioning that either.
Get out.
Anyway, we're the 240p Club. We are crazy podcasters. We will be doing this again next week or a week after. I don't know when we're gathering. And we'll have a topic other than that wretched game. And this is copyright 2019 to 240p Club. Visit us at www.240pclub.com. We are at Facebook, facebook.com/240p Club. Also, we have a Twitter at 240p Club, and that's all the platforms we're utilizing right now. We used to have an Instagram, we used to have a Twitch. You know what? Those are inactive. We're not going to be using those moving forward. You know why? Because watching us stream games turned out to be kind of stupid, and plus I don't want to get part of that toxic community that we discussed last podcast. So we'll just leave it at that. No more streaming. This is a podcast only. We might stream for special events, but meanwhile, Facebook, Twitter, and our personal site are the ways to reach us.
Bye.